Hello, and thank you for joining us for another installment of the Wayne Public Library Virtual Jazz Series. Today, I have the great opportunity and pleasure to talk with drummer Zach Adleman. So, welcome.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited to talk to you today. I had the great pleasure, too, of meeting you in May of 2023 when you performed with the Big Swing and Big Band at Our Lady of Consolation Church, which is one of our collaborative jazz series. And I also heard you perform at Brush Culture in Teaneck, and you were very talented. So I've been very much looking forward to this.
Thank you. Me too.
So we're going to start with a little bit of background, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. I want to just, as I do with many of my other interviews, just talk about the many hats that you wear. And with most of the musicians I speak to, I'm exhausted by all the things you seem to accomplish in just a short amount of time and also on a daily basis. So kudos to you.
Thanks.
So I have that you're a drummer, you're a composer and an arranger, and an educator. Is there anything I'm missing?
That's mostly it.
So you started very young. You started playing drums at age 6. Did you also learn any other instruments when you were young, or were you learning to read music? And like, how did that all start?
It started basically we had a block party on my street that I grew up in New Jersey in Montclair, and my neighbor would leave his drums in our hut sometimes because they would need to rehearse with my parents. My parents are musicians. So that experience of like seeing the drum set and then like messing around on it, and then eventually that neighbor, his name was John, his kid who was my age, handed me a pair of drumsticks and said, "You should play along to the System of a Down song," when I was really young. And I played along on the floor on his carpet in his bedroom, and I got like so excited it felt like I was flying or something. So from then I got sort of mentored almost by these drummers who were on my street, whether it be my neighbors up the street or his dad or himself, and my parents were musicians, so they were encouraging me. And eventually I just kept playing, and I had a drum teacher who I wasn't the biggest fan of at the time when I was 6, which go figure, I'm really young. And then fast forward a little bit later, I start back up in 5th grade with this guy Dana LaMarca, and he's the first guy that really allows me to, or gets me to take it seriously. For whatever reason, I was like, okay, I'm ready to go. And since then, I've been taking lessons pretty much every year with different people. Then eventually in high school, I got into jazz. So that was a totally new thing for me. And that started through Jazz House Kids and other organizations as well that I think like growing up in Montclair, the North New Jersey, New York area is like one of the most incredible places in the world to study jazz or to be around jazz if you're any age, but let alone a high school student that's trying to learn the music, because there's of all these education programs and all the opportunities to hear and play and see live great jazz music.
As you point out, I mean, just within our area, so here in Wayne, we have the William Patterson University Jazz Program, which is a bachelor's and master's. And then Montclair now has their jazz program headed by Oscar Perez. And it's just so much wonderful education and opportunity. You're right, it's a great area to learn and to perform.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when you mentioned about being in 5th grade, I have a notation here that at 10, which would have been around that time, you joined Drums of Thunder percussion group, and you traveled to perform at major sporting arenas on the East Coast at the U.S. Open and Madison Square Garden. So in 5th grade and thereabouts, you're already performing in large venues.
Maybe the biggest venues of my life at that age. Yes, 4th or 5th grade, yeah. And it was a public school program through Hillside Elementary School. Mr. D'Amico ran, and we did maybe at least 20 shows, I think, a year. We do the Garden, and we go to DC and do the Wizards basketball games, and Philly, 76ers games, the Knicks, the Nets, all of these games. Yeah, it was fun.
So everything after that is just gravy, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Except now I got to make a living from it. So, you know.
So, do you also play any other instruments? Piano, because you are a composer, does that also play into it? Pun intended.
Yes. I mean, yeah, I play a little bit of piano. I think my ears are maybe a bit ahead of my actual technique. Um, but yeah, I play piano to compose also just for fun. I've been going through Ella Fitzgerald, Richard Rodgers, and Hart record recently and learning this songs from that. So piano, and then through teaching, I've been getting more into bass and guitar. I'd say more bass, but I've been playing bass in some ensembles at Jazz House Kids and also the Calhoun School. And certainly to just teach the students a bass line or a progression or something, I often get on those other instruments and I demonstrate.
Well, that sounds very natural because it's all part of the rhythm section, right?
It's true.
So, who are some of your inspirations and influencers as a drummer, aside from the people on the block?
Well, I think in the beginning it was like Chris Adler and some other rock drummers and metal drummers, and then later it became drummers who would work with John Mayer. Um, and then now I'd say, and since high school, some of the most important people have been Roy Haynes, who just passed away about 10 days ago. One of the most incredible drummers ever, and he was 99. So his style, his ability to be clever and comedic, but also very intentional about every single note he played, and really swinging and really versatile. Those things have inspired me through my whole life and still inspire me. People like Tony Williams and Elvin Jones, other people that really inspire me. Ollie Jackson. There's a lot of really great drummers, and each of them, for me, there's a couple pieces that are musical, but also not musical, just like their essence and their being that I really resonate with or relate to. Some I've seen in person, and some I've never had the chance of hearing or meeting because they passed away decades ago. That's the cool thing about jazz is it's just such a continuum that whether they're alive or not, there's a way to feel connected to all these people, especially once you've really spent the time with their recordings or even talking to people like Billy Hart, who lives in Montclair, lives in New Jersey, who was friends with all the people I just named.
That's exciting. You're right. It is a continuum, and we have recordings or performances that we can see where what they bring, their joy and their joie de vivre comes through in their music, and then we're able to experience it. Music is such a wonderful. It's an elixir. It's a comfort. It's a salve. It's a joy.
Absolutely. The drummer, I forgot his name. So Steve Jordan is the drummer with John Mayer, whom I love now and I loved back then as well.
I have to admit, I'm a big John Mayer fan, and the recordings with Pino Palladino on bass are really fantastic.
John Mayer Trio is unbelievable. I love that group.
So when you moved then into jazz and started doing Jazz House Kids and stuff, was there did something click in you, or were you like, this is it, this is where I'm going to pursue, rather than doing rock or other types of music to pursue?
Yeah. Well, I think when I got to Jazz House Kids and I was a freshman in high school, I still wasn't like totally concerned with a career at all. I was just totally interested in the music. And what happened was at Jazz House, I found kids like Julian Lee and Coleman Hughes and other sort of top level, like some of the most well recognized people in the country on their instruments. I saw them, they were like a year, two, maybe 3 years older than me, and they were just like flying, way high musically. So I was like, so I guess it's possible to do that. And then these teachers were kind of helping me actually get there, like literally. So I was like, so if I do this over and over, maybe I can get flown out to California and I can play with the best students in the country, or maybe I can do XYZ. And I just thought it was really cool. And then to learn about the culture and see that like all these people would just answer my questions after class because they loved it too. It's just like all these things were happening at the same time. And I started really liking the music itself. So the culture and seeing people my age and then just watching this camaraderie all came together at the same time and made it so that way I fell in love with this music. And then I think as a result, I ended up getting better at drums, which was one of my main concerns. Like, how do I keep growing because it felt like some other genres or people that I saw, it felt like maybe they weren't taking it as seriously. And it felt like through Jazz House, this was a program and this type of music that's like a lifelong pursuit that even the best people in jazz still say they want to learn and they're not there yet. So that's what I fell in love with, that kind of endless pursuit, which I'm still very much on.
So it's interesting that your situation in entering Jazz House Kids and being in that environment gave you a view to the opportunities you could pursue, and then seeing the culture and all the wonderful aspects that go with it that then follow. That's interesting to me. So you were also had a New Orleans group in 2022 that I saw on your YouTube page there. Do you still perform with them? And I have to say, you play a really mean tambourine.
Thank you so much. That's funny. So I only did a couple groups, unfortunately. It was a very short-lived stint there with that group. I played at the Hue in New York City with Summer Camargo, who's on SNL now. She was playing trumpet on there. And I haven't played it. I haven't played another gig with them since then, unfortunately. But I do love playing tambourine. I got that from just being around the Wynton rings through his drummers, and they always prioritize playing the tambourine. So I do get to play the tambourine sometimes, and if it's not my own, other people's New Orleans style groups.
That's a fun music. I really enjoy listening to it because it's jazz in its own presentation, but there's so much joy that can also have much sadness. Like it's music wearing it on its sleeve, so to speak. Everything in New Orleans jazz is just what they're feeling, and that's what I love about it.
I love that. Yeah, I love that too.
So when you were talking about rock and how playing rock drums and how jazz made you a better drummer, you brought to mind I'm a huge Rush fan, and
Oh
Neil
yeah.
Peart. Actually, you probably know this already that after some tragedies in his life, he stepped away, and then he actually decided to learn how to play jazz drums, and he actually changed how he held his sticks from the overhand to this. How do you express that? The
The
side,
traditional grip is what it's called.
which is fascinating to me that someone that accomplished who is in the pursuit of knowledge decides at that time in his career that he needs to relearn how to play the drums in a totally different manner.
I didn't know that. No, that's really fascinating. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, they have a very good documentary out and about just the whole band and how their whole journey went. So I'm very much a fan.
I like them too. Yeah, that was a, they were. I was checking them out in when I was younger too, trying to learn some of his grooves, which are pretty nuanced. It's pretty amazing.
You think you'll ever have a kid as big as his?
If someone pays for it, sure.
All right, in 2020, I just want to talk about that you worked with London Film. Do I have that correct? The
The
London
London
Film
Film School,
School?
yeah. So for the London Film School, I wrote my own piece. We called it For Lydia, and that was a collaboration with Juilliard and the London Film School. And I was able to meet someone virtually who was a student there, and we did I composed a film score. It was pretty short. It was maybe 5 minutes long, and then that was it.
Now, with your film score, what was the instrumentation that you had?
Well, it was just me at on my computer, so I got to create however little or big I wanted. Piano and strings. That's what I used at that for that score.
No drums.
I don't think I used drums. It was a pretty
That's
dramatic
interesting.
piece, and the project had no dialogue. That was part of the assignment for the students. So it was tons of visual images, and it was pretty intense. So I think having more drones, longer pitched, more moody things actually worked better. And no
That's a
drums.
lot of freedom for you.
It is, or pressure, yeah, both.
Good point. So, with spring can really hang you up the most in 2020. How did that come about? And it's something that you arranged and mixed for. I have the notation: violin, cello, harp, viola, the rhythm section, and voice.
Yes, so that was a Juilliard assignment to write to arrange for strings while I was a student there, and that happened during COVID, so I had to reach out to all these string players who I think mostly were students at Juilliard whom I'd never met, and so I would just email all these people that I'd never met, which was a little bit challenging because sometimes Juilliard had a tendency of keeping us in our own boxes at that time. So I didn't know these people personally um, yet. And then I asked them if they would perform on my string project. So I sent them the music, and then I ended up working mostly on the mixing myself, which was also a new thing for me. And our teacher, Andy Farber, helped me at the end make sure the mixing sounded good and even looked at some of the charts. But that was fun to think about, to how do you write for strings, and what are the things that strings can do, or maybe emphasize that a traditional jazz band that I'm used to playing in wouldn't.
That's a great opportunity for you to be able to do that, and it's stretching your musical mind, right?
Definitely. Yeah, one of my heroes is a guy named Billy Childs, who's a piano player, and a lot of his career is through composition. So he's writing for orchestra, he's writing for brass quintet, and it's in my opinion it's his own identity, but it's jazz and 20th century classical music, but also Bach and Beethoven, and so he's someone that I would love to aspire to get to in some capacity of my own.
Are you also then a fan of classical music, and does that help inform you for when you're composing for strings?
Yes, I am a fan of it. I wish I knew more and had more experience listening and was just more of an expert on it. But I do go see whether it's the ballet or opera or the New York Philharmonic. I like to check out classical music on my own time when I can. And I've taken some classes at Juilliard and just in general throughout my college where I'm able to talk to some teachers about, other composers' styles, what made them unique, and even made some composition friends at Juilliard where there's one guy, Sebastian Winter, every time I go to his apartment, we'd look at John Williams scores, and he would share a little bit of insight about his orchestration. He did Harry Potter and many other enormous Hollywood films. So this is something that is like a passion of mine that I want to spend more time on. Sometimes I end up doing other things, but I keep coming back to arranging and composition and studying classical composers, that whole world.
Interestingly enough, there's a new documentary about John Williams that's streaming on Disney, and they go through his whole career, and it's really fascinating.
That's another one I got to check out.
I'm a big fan of jazz piano trios, and I've mentioned before that two of my favorites pianists are Duke Ellington and Monty Alexander, and you can hear in their music that classical influence. Monty Alexander, I hear a lot of Debussy, and with Duke Ellington, he has Reflections in D, and I'm just a big fan, and so it's a tradition that's been done before, is borrowing from classical in jazz compositions. I think Mary Lou Williams did too, possibly.
I think it would make sense. I think we jazz musicians tend to see that as just another rich musical history that you can grab, harmony, rhythm, even form. I know Wynton Marsalis has talked to me a little bit about taking forms from even stride pianists at that time, or early jazz musicians who actually were coming from that anyways, at least in a formal way, in terms of how to structure the melody and the harmony and which sections occur in which order and how many numbers of sections. So I think that's another way I would love to work in my own influences, taking like a concerto form or sonata form or different forms that arise from those periods.
So I just want to mention that you had graduated from Juilliard's master program in 2021, and then you had gotten your undergraduate at University of Michigan in 2019, I believe.
Michigan State, yes.
Michigan State. Oh, sorry. Big difference, I know. And that,
Yes.
and I believe that's also where you met Alton Sinclair and Marcus Howell, correct?
Yes, I met a lot of close friends who are still teacher collaborators as well as musical collaborators in New York City.
But there's a wonderful recital that is on your YouTube page from 2020 with Alton and Marcus, who have both performed here at the Wayne Public Library as part of our jazz series. And they're both phenomenal musicians, and they're in good company with you, of course. So, or you're in good company with them, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
So when you're talking about wanting to, let's talk about your compositions and how you compose. So when you, this is a question I like to ask, is when you start your compositions, are you thinking of, I want to write a samba, I want to write a ballad, I'm thinking of someone, and this is what is the inspiration for me to write it. You would just mention that you wanted to take maybe a sonata form or concerto form. So how do you go about your composition process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it starts out with either a melody that comes into my head. I could be bike riding or in traffic in a car, something like that. Or two, I'm at the piano, I'm messing around, and all of a sudden I play something, sometimes it's an accident, that just seems like it needs more investigating. I think that's the first thing that I need is some sort of seed. Like, oh, that's something that we should explore for longer periods of time. So once I've identified that, usually it's a melody, but it could be a chordal or harmonic progression. Um, Once I've identified that, I'll try to flesh out the melody more, usually through singing. Sometimes I'm guilty of just playing the piano, but it's really important for me. And something that also another mentor, Wynton Marsalis, has shared with me is just try to sing it all the time. Just sing it, because if you can sing it, then you know that the melody is kind of what you mean it to be. That's the way you can ensure that it's exactly coming from you and your heart, as opposed to some technical etude that maybe you studied 6 weeks ago. So once I get the melody down, then I think about a vibe, which vibe is not a very specific term. I kind of mean that intentionally, because a vibe could mean that the harmony is going to sit in a certain way. It could mean that the tempo is going to be some way. Could affect anything. So I try to create the vibe, which could often relate to some actual experience of my life, like going on a hike or seeing a building in New York. So I'm creating the vibe and I'm matching that with this melody that I've now created. And eventually that's how the song comes to be.
That's a fascinating answer. Thank you for that. It really is, everybody's process is slightly different. And when I was talking and interviewing Alton, he talks about that vibe where he'll say, okay, I wanted to write something that had a Ponciana vibe. And so then he wrote a wonderful song, which I absolutely adore. And of course, I can't remember the name of right now, but but that's where there's a certain language between musicians to be able to say, put this on it. But you're also talking about your intention and what you want to bring to it and informing them to bring that as well. I think it's
Hmm.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, as a teacher, you have a fantastic master class. I found it very interesting also on your YouTube page where you're talking about the rhythm section interacting and well, you talk about the relationship between the soloist and the accompanist at the beginning and when to use what techniques. I find as a non-musician, but a music lover, all these processes really exciting because when I go to hear music, to me, I'm getting the end product, right? So I'm getting what you all are presenting on the fly even. So to learn it, to say, okay, as a drummer, when you're accompanying a soloist, this is a technique you can use, or this is when you use it. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Specifically about the rhythm section or
Do
anything.
it all.
Do it all. Yeah. I mean, I think one thing I like, I'd heard from Wynton, and then I'll get into it, is he says that in sports, you always have people, commentators. There's always talking while the sports game, and most people who watch sports already know the rules, or at least most of them. So it begs the question, why do they have that? And I think Wynton's answer would be because people need to be told like what's going on, and not everybody knows everything. It's very helpful. So we should do that with jazz. Kind of is why you're asking this question. We should be able to talk about and explain what's going on because then people can be clued in. Um, So I mean, yeah, for me as a player, I'm a drummer, so I have a lot of power to create as an engine in the song. So let's say the alto player is very boring and they're very shy or very scared or something. I can do something to invite them in musically, whether that's playing in a certain level of intensity or maybe playing quietly to let them know it's okay to be themselves in this group. So I think every musician is constantly um, doing small adjustments to make each other feel comfortable, but also to do what we believe is best for the music and also is best for the audience. So those are three components that hopefully are all the same, but every now and then you have to adjust um, to reach those people. Sometimes during a solo, um, say at the Django, which sometimes can be a louder venue in New York City, at times on my solo, I might stop playing for like 3 seconds or something, and everyone who's talking hears themselves talking, and then they all get quieter. So there's all these things that at least I do to get clued in, to get each other on the same page of the band, the audience. For me, the most impactful shows have been one. It's kind of like going to a religious service where everyone is all in the same space intentionally on purpose. Everyone, it's like one room. It's like one people or one group. So that's my hope and my dream for music is when it feels like that. And so then the question for myself is how do I manifest that as best as possible with the musicians? How can we be on the same page? And then how can the audience then be on the same page as us? How can we deliver this really special message to them?
It's a magic. I've talked about this before. There's an alchemy where when the musicians are communicating tacitly amongst themselves and getting joy out of what's happening on the bandstand, it's translated then to the audience, and then we give you an energy back, and it's magical. I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I love the fact that you've said now a few times, when Marsalis and I were talking, or when Ms. Marsalis said this to me, and I think it's fantastic. You have that ability to have a mentor or a friend who can help you with teaching you further.
Yeah, he's really special. I think I've been told by other mentors, Rodney Whitaker, who ran Michigan State, it's important to have mentors. And I mean, the truth is, I don't know everything, and we all, even if I did, which is impossible, we all always need to lean on each other, and that goes way outside of just music. I think I'm learning that now after having just done a record, that there's so many things that I just need to lean on other people. Someone else has a relationship or a knowledge about this component of the process that I don't, and it doesn't mean that they're better or worse, and none of that. It's just I don't know what they know, and there's probably something that I know that they don't know. And I kind of realized that in college too at Michigan State when you're like in 50,000 people of all different majors. But I'm learning it again that we really need to lean on each other, and it's okay to do that. And like we should all come from that place. This is like there's no other way to do life. I don't see another way. You have to just lean on each other.
It's a large community, and we can always help one another and gain from one another. And I think the pandemic showed us that that is essential and also difficult. And then just getting out of the pandemic, we're still kind of recovering from that. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way of putting it. I think the pandemic has made me feel like anything, particularly socially interacting, had to be more intentional because when you're in school, I was in grad school during the pandemic, and I could just walk around before the pandemic, and I'd see a bunch of people, so I didn't have to work hard to meet or talk to people. But then the pandemic, if I want to talk to someone, gonna have to get on the phone. I'm gonna have to schedule a walk, make sure that they're not sick, etc. It became like extra steps were involved just to do the same thing.
So when you were going through the pandemic, I believe that this was the genesis of your CD that just came out last month, right?
A lot of the music, yes.
So let's talk about this wonderful CD that I believe it was released on October 25th. It's now available in all formats, streaming, CD. I believe you have vinyl out too.
No vinyl yet, but just CD and all streaming.
All right. It's called We Make Stories for a New Day. It was produced by Stellar Music. And what I love about your CD and hearing you talk about your CD on your channel is it's about telling stories. And I'm a writer, and I think the communication and presenting ideas, any kind of creative process, whether it's writing or music, you're telling stories. And I think the best musicians are the ones that can convey that. And do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, each song on the album is like a vignette or a little story that hopefully, when woven together, you can see this larger picture of a little bit of who I am and how I want the world to be in a more communal and a positive and listening space with each other, even despite our differences. So, a song like All Around Us, which is one of the first tracks on the album, it's a calypso, so it has like a very buoyant, exciting vibe to it. I wrote that song after having hiked in Brevard, North Carolina, which is where I was teaching at the Brevard Jazz Institute. Michael Dees is the director of that program, and he wrote the liner notes actually on the album. And so I was hiking in this alongside this waterfall, and with every few steps or every couple hundred yards, I found a new view of the same waterfall. So sometimes it was vertical, other times it was more horizontal. It was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. Usually I just see the waterfall and I'm just like, cool, that's beautiful, and then I walk away. So this whole experience was really novel and also very exciting and beautiful. And it's like anywhere I turned my neck, I was like looking at new all around us, like new beauty that I just couldn't have imagined. So I wrote that song to sort of encapsulate and commemorate that hike and that experience. And I use that song to kind of try to center the room at shows and say, look, we're all out here in jazz music. Like, let's be appreciative and have some gratitude. We're all here together. I mean, this is an amazing thing. So that's like an example. Each song has a different story attached to it that all have similar details, and they're very personal. And it's like a journal entry in a way, a musical journal entry, like Taylor Swift.
Your song "A New Day." It's when I listen to music, I'm aware of in my because I love words. I'm aware of my describing the song in my head with just words. That's how I kind of react to me. I feel it too. So if I find myself getting choked up or whatever the emotion is, but I also have like these little words just pop in my head. So for A New Day, I had it's light, it's upbeat, it's happy. But there's a lot of nuance in that composition. And I really loved it. As you have pointed out, it sets the mood, but it takes you also on a journey.
Mm, thank you. Yeah, that song was also that was written in my childhood bedroom when I was living at my parents during the pandemic, and times were pretty rough. So I said, I'm gonna write something that's gonna hopefully make people feel good and just imagine what it will be like when we have a new day when we're all back in community again.
Yeah. Now this your CD was recorded at Samurai Studios, and it was produced, which I was surprised to see, by Isaiah J. Thompson, who is your musical partner, so to speak, and you guys met at age 14 at Jazz House Kids.
Yeah, we were playing like 6 hours a week or something the last couple years of high school. We were in all these combos and big bands together, and we would miss one rehearsal to do the other. It was like madness, but we got really close, and we did some touring for some years later together in his band, and maybe a couple things through my group as well. And then he's just been someone that I know I can lean on musically, and I trust him. I trust his ear. He's honest with me. He's always been honest. So I thought he'd be perfect for that.
We were very blessed to have him perform as part of our jazz series in June with Our Lady of Consolation Church at recordings on our YouTube page. And he's a gentleman, he's kind, he's genuine. And I'm going to say the same goes for you. I think you have that same personality, and I can back this up with proof, because when you had the musicians speaking about you for the recording of We Make Stories for a New Day. These are quotes here. Pianist Luther Allison said that you speak to the joy, love, and compassion that you carry with yourself, and it's an honest and pure reflection of your heart.
Very sweet. I paid him to say that. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, you must have paid Steve Wilson too, because he also said acknowledging tough times while pushing for a better and brighter future. That's what you do when you're composing and when you're presenting and creating. They'll take their money by check, by the way. So when you're putting together a different ensemble, whether it's a trio, whether it's any size, what goes into your choosing what size to make it with and how do you choose the music for presentation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, the record is interesting. It's duo for one song, then it's a lot of quartet, it's some quintet, and it's sextet. So clearly there's it's all over the place in that regard. I think some songs, some of the songs on the album I wanted or I felt needed a bigger explanation, like a bigger presentation. So I had more people doing it. And that allowed more intricacies with each of the voices. So I could do harmony. And I think my hope was that the impact would just be almost bigger in the literal sense, I guess, because the ensemble is bigger. However, even when I'm writing for trio or quartet, I still am imagining often a bigger ensemble because, and there's other composers that have done that, like Kenny Garrett, who's one of my biggest inspirations. He often writes melodies in the piano in the left hand, or the bass melody, or Shy Maestro writes having the bass as a melodic instrument. So I think even in my smaller groups, like a quartet, I still try to make it sound bigger than whatever it is because I think it's just more interesting to have more instruments and voices telling a story musically. So that way, it just keeps everyone, including the audience, engaged, even more engaged.
When you're then a leader, because you've also worked as a sideman, when you're a leader and you're choosing who you're performing with, is it because you have a certain relationship, or is there times where you need to inform them of how you want something presented, or are you just relying on their intuition?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of it is intuition, maybe at least 70%. It depends on the person. And sometimes like their instinct is just a little bit different than what I was hoping. And the same thing is true when I'm playing. I'm like, this is honestly what I believe. And they're like, don't do that. We actually would rather this other thing. And I'm like, well, okay, this is what I believe, but look, we're two different people. So there's always room for that. I guess if there's a person that I have to do that with every measure of every song, then maybe they're not the right person for the gig. But everyone who I end up calling has tons, if not all, of the instincts that I'm kind of hoping for. And I think that's the same is true with close relationships, friends, romantic partners. Like these people have lots of the same interests or same instincts, maybe not everything, and that's okay. You don't need to agree on everything to be a good friend with someone.
That's a very good point. I wanted to just mention you have on your YouTube channel a recording of you with your trio, and you're playing All the Things You Are, which is one of my favorite songs. But what I love about it is, first of all, your intro is it's a great drum intro. You've got wonderful beats and just a feel put out there. And if I'm not mistaken, you go into a samba for about 4 measures or so, right? And then you go back to a traditional swing. Did I catch that correctly?
I don't remember the arrangement on that. I'll have to go back and listen to it, because that was a few years ago. But that sounds like something I would do. So I'm
And
going to
it's
say yes.
so I was wondering if you were the one leading that. So if you're piano, bass, and drums, and you're changing it into a rhythm, are
Yeah,
you the drummer then leading it, or is it the bassist leading it, or is it the keyboards leading it? That was my question.
I see. I think in that case, I think I predetermined. So I let everyone know, hey, we're gonna do 4 measures of bossa going into 4 measures of swing. So that way they knew, it wasn't like a total surprise. Sometimes I do that on gigs, where I'll switch groove. It depends, like you can tell if certain musicians are open to that, or at least sometimes you can tell. And if they are, then I'm happy to do that. There's a good example of Tony Williams with the Miles Davis Quintet where he switches grooves. I think My Funny Valentine and many other songs, sometimes on the bridge or a turnaround. So there is a history of that, and I think so it's okay to do that improvised, but in a tight arrangement, if you want everyone to be super clear, then you got to tell them either on the music or verbally, hey, look, we're gonna do this for the 4 measures, and then we're gonna do that for the next four.
It's wonderful. It was a great surprise. I really enjoyed listening to that. So everybody go to your YouTube channel and check that out.
Thanks for listening.
And Alvester Garnett is also someone who likes to switch between different rhythms and styles and genres. And he's also a very exciting drummer to listen to.
Yeah, and he taught at Jazz House, or still does, at least in the summer for many years. I was able to listen to him speak and learn a lot from him.
So let's talk about your teaching because you have mentioned many of the places that you teach at. And interestingly enough, when I had the opportunity to interview Dave Stryker last week, he kind of had said that the first hat he sees himself wearing is a performer and then as a teacher. Whereas in reading about and preparing for today and talking with you, I get the impression that in many ways, all your hats have the same import. And so whether it's composition or education or performing, they all seem to play a very large part to you. Is there one that you feel is stronger than the other in what you want to do, or are they equal?
That's a good question. Um, I guess the truth is that maybe it depends on the week or the day, and there's a interesting relationship between like what I'm giving and what I'm getting back. Some days I feel like I'm teaching and I'm just like it's so inspiring and it feels amazing, and like to think about where the kids have gone from last week or even a month ago to where they are now. That is like a really amazing thought. Other times I'm practicing drums every week or every day in the week, and I'm like, man, I'm on the gig. I know that I feel totally different on Friday than I did Monday, and I've been playing every day, and I get so much reward from that. So I guess there's lots of nuances to that question, and even just thinking about it, how like some weeks I have to teach a lot, or some weeks I have like 9 gigs, and that's what I have to do. So all of it, in all those cases, I feel like hopefully I'm giving a lot of myself, and then I tend to get a lot back as well. Yeah, that's the best way I can answer that for now, I think.
Well, you express such an excitement when you talk about your composition, and there's an excitement too when you talk about teaching and the benefits of all these different things and performing. It sounds like you're living a blessed world to be have your passions actually, and it's three related passions, right? So teaching is one passion, composing, creating, performing, but they're all part of the same pot. Yeah, that's a real blessing.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the mentors and people I saw around since I was a kid, they did those things, and they didn't separate them as if there was some very necessary, structured component. They were all just like you'd see a guy, he's at a piano, what's up? Now he's playing the piano, now he's writing music, now he's practicing and whoever. So I think that overall vibe and community, and when I saw that as a kid, it helped me. Made me think that it was possible to do all those things.
So when you're teaching at Calhoun Jazz and Percussion departments, so you're teaching high schoolers, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So, but you also don't you also teach younger students? Is that part of Jazz House Kids at Trinity School or Trinity Church? Excuse me.
That's Trinity for me right now is there's I think just one student who's in middle school, the rest are high school. I have I've been doing private lessons, and right now I have a 9-year-old. We started when he was 5. Um, and he's awesome. So I have throughout my time as an educator, I've taught students from ages 5 to I think maybe 55 or so. At Stanford, they had some adult students that I was teaching there during the summer camp they have. And I think each age brings its own unique benefits or challenges or everything. You get everything with all these different ages. I mean, to me, the benefits of teaching older people, one, the level of clarity you can communicate with is very high. There's no language barriers, no vocabulary, generally speaking. Um, and two, older people generally have more discipline. It depends if they're busy in their own lives. But if I say you should practice this for 7 minutes a day, I think an adult who has discipline actually really can do that. They don't need to learn that. But younger people have to actually learn that skill. So there are some benefits. I think also older people I've noticed ask a lot of questions. Sometimes depending on the person, but some like want to be told exactly what to do, so there's no mystery. Whereas kids are, I think, maybe more okay living in a space that's a little bit confusing, or they don't know every detail and they're just going to try it. Like, whatever.
Well, I think that that goes to how one processes, right? Maybe as the older we get, we process more mentally, whereas younger, we process more viscerally. That's
Could
a
be.
theory.
I'll take it.
I really have enjoyed speaking with you today. At the end of this interview, I'll include your YouTube page and channel information and all your social media and your website so that you can follow up with Zach and get more from his website and yeah, it's been really fantastic talking to you. So I just want to add one more thing before we say goodbye. You're the first musician who I am pleased to see has kind of a mission statement on your website, and I love it. And I'm going to read it here. Zach's mission is to use music to better people's lives through joy and inspiration. And I think that's wonderful that you not only have that intention, but that you state it and that you strive towards that and that you actually fulfill that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being so attentive. That's the best researched interview I've ever done.
Thank you. Well, it's been such a pleasure. I look forward to hearing you perform again soon, and I wish you a happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, Patty. Go support the Wayne Public Library. Thank you for all the work that you're doing and that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you.